Right. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
I can take this off so I can be heard better. How's everyone doing? Good. All right. I think some of you were here last week and some not. No big deal. So just a brief review and maybe a little bit of an overview for those who were not here last week. What I'm offering from last week and this week and next is a practice that's most common in Tibetan Buddhism, the 7-point mind training, and it's a training on compassion. And what we're going to talk about tonight is a central teaching of it, which is the Tonglen practice. So the entire practice is called, I think, generally referred to as lojong, mind training or mind refinement. And the practice tonight, Tonglen, is probably the most well-known of the 7-point mind training. And it's specifically a practice of training ourselves in compassion. The whole thing is about compassion, but Tonglen in particular is a particular practice around compassion. So last week we talked about the preliminaries, training in the preliminaries, and we're going to go through those again in a brief meditation. So the approach in lojong is that we sort of set the stage for spiritual practice, and we train in these four preliminary practices. Let's just make sure I've got them here. And they're admittedly not terribly pleasant, but they are important to remember. So I'll guide you through them in a moment. And then the second part that I talked about last week is training in absolute bodhicitta, or the mind of enlightenment that seeks enlightenment for the benefit of all beings. So the absolute bodhicitta is the word that I want is the aspiration. It's our aspiration toward enlightenment. We cultivate absolute bodhicitta as an aspiration toward enlightenment. And then what we're going to talk about tonight, specifically Tonglen, is the application of that. So lojong teaches absolute bodhicitta and relative bodhicitta. And I like the way that Norman Fisher talks about the aspiration, which is absolute love. This kind of pure love that we have for all beings, for all things. The nature of how things are. Think about, those of you who've been around here for a while, think about the 4 bodhisattva vows. There's no way, if you think about it on a practical level, that we can save all beings, but that's our aspiration, as an example. Relative bodhicitta, doing the hard work. An antidote to the fatigue of doing the hard work is absolute bodhicitta. So far so good as a kind of a review and maybe a tiny introduction for those of you who weren't here last week. So I'm going to just invite us to just sit for a few minutes, and I'm going to just review the 4 points of training in the preliminaries and and the let's see, there's 5 points of training in absolute bodhicitta. We'll just take a moment and settle back into the body. There'll be a lot of sitting tonight, so feel free as we sit and as I guide you through to move around, and I don't want people to be uncomfortable. So the first contemplation, there's 4 contemplations that we think about when we're training in the preliminaries. And the first one is to reflect on the rarity and the preciousness of this human life. The rarity and preciousness of this human life. And one way to think about it is, of all the kinds of beings that we could have been born as, we were born as a human. The second reflection is absolute inevitability of our death. We don't know when or how, but death comes for every living thing on this planet. And so we reflect on that. Third reflection is the awesome and indelible power of our actions, our karma. That every action we take has some kind of effect. The awesome and indelible power of our actions. And then finally, the inescapability of suffering in a human life. We're not saying that life is suffering, but we're saying that life is marked by suffering. And that no one escapes. I suppose the good news is that we're not alone either. And so these are 4 reflections that set the stage, and from a Buddhist perspective, these are the things that impel us, that propel us forward into spiritual practice, some form of spiritual practice, of course. There are many. We have to come to terms with these things. As Norman Fisher said, the gift and the problem that is our life. Can reflect on the 5 aspects of absolute bodhicitta. It's creating the container from which we act, from which we do the hard work. And the first one being that we see everything as a dream. One way to practice this is to become very present to the passing of time. Just everything slips away moment by moment by moment. The second point with which to cultivate absolute bodhicitta is to examine the nature of awareness. Can we find a concrete me or I, an identifiable solid something? Yes, we find collections of thoughts, emotions, sensations, opinions, but can you find a solid I that you can point to reliably? And then next, just to keep us on our toes, we are advised to not get stuck on peace. To not get stuck on essentially the first two. It can be kind of an escape to see everything as a dream, or to not find an identifiable self, and so we don't get stuck there. It's not the whole picture. And then next, we can learn to rest in the openness of our bodies and our minds. And finally, perhaps my favorite in post-meditation, be a child of illusion. The way I like to hold this one is to allow yourself to be taken by awe and wonder as though you were a child. Okay. Well, that's a very quick review from last week. Does anybody have any questions? Anything to share? Any reflections, experiences? All right. Let me find this here. We just anything GKA? Okay, make sure I don't ignore people online like I unintendedly did last week. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to give you kind of a brief overview of the Tonglen practice, and then I'm going to guide you through it. It'll be about a 35 to 40 minute sit, and I just want to just kind of say at the outset that if you get antsy or need to stand up or move a little bit, that's totally fine. So I just want to make sure that you know that's available. So again, Tonglen is also called as giving and taking, or sending and receiving. I think the Tong means giving, and the Len means basically the Tong means the Tong means receiving, and the Len means taking. So it's also known as exchanging self and other. It's a very interesting practice. What I like about this whole approach to this 7-point mind training is that there's no presumption that you will have perfected any part of it before moving on to the next. The whole thing is basically unfolding for you at once. So yeah, you can sit and reflect on the preliminaries and kind of go, okay, right, I know I'm going to die or whatever, I know, but And then you move on and you start to think about cultivating absolute bodhicitta, and maybe you practice something and then you go back and you continue to reflect on the preliminaries and you continue. So it's a constant evolution. And those of you who have been sitting Zazen for a while already know this, that you come in here and you sit and you think it's a great experience, and then the longer you sit, you might wonder why you keep doing it, and especially if you do a long sesshin, but then you do, and more unfolds and opens up for you. So all of these practices are like that. I think any spiritual practice, any genuine approach to a spiritual practice is like this. It's not like school, where you learn how to, do math and get a good grade and then move on. So that's what I like about it. So yes, we've just barely touched the first two parts of this, but that's okay. This just opens the door for exploration. So again, I really have been learned a lot from reading Norman Fisher's book on the 7-point mind training, or on the lojong, and he says to understand suffering, we have to love, and to understand love, we have to suffer. It's impossible to take in the pain of another person unless we take in our own. And one thing about this, there's a lot of, the word pain and suffering crops up like every other word in this practice. And, and it doesn't have to be like the agonizing, awful pain that some of us experience at sometimes. It can be like the little things. I produce this practice a lot if I get my daughter and granddaughter to live with me, and it's just inevitable that we have little flare-ups, occasionally, and it's just the way it is when you live with people, right? And so I use it a lot for those little flare-ups, and just see them as like, okay, here we go, and I don't have to hold on to it. So I'm even just like talking about the mundane, everyday kind of difficulty, challenges. So the words pain and suffering show up a lot, but I just really want to make it clear it's just that kind of stuff too. In fact, that's probably most of what it is for most of us on a daily basis, is just the daily crap of living with other people, darn it, It's just not always very easy. So there's two main purposes to Tonglen. First of all, we're training our heart to do what it does not want to do, which is to go toward difficulty rather than away from it. Most of us want to run away from it. I know I do most of the time. So we're training our heart to go toward it. And the other thing is that each of our own difficulties is not different from anyone else's. It's just stuff. It's just suffering. It's not my suffering or Issei's suffering. It's just suffering. It's just pain. It's just difficulty. And I think I realize that when I practice this in the moment. If somebody in my family is having a hard time and I take a moment to practice, it shifts the perspective a little bit, that I'm focusing on them, but I'm realizing that it's not any different. I don't know if it's just a very interesting shift in perspective. It's just stuff. And it doesn't have to be mine or yours, and we don't have to get into a wrangle about it. We don't have to blame and try to fix and change. We can just breathe it in and breathe it out. So we're going to do this. We're going to practice this. And the way that we start, so I'm not going to tell you how to do it, I'm just going to tell you how to do it as we go along, so that it unfolds for you, hopefully, in a nice way. The way we start with this is that we rest in the openness of mind. We start with that point in absolute bodhicitta, where we rest in the absolute, the rest in the openness of mind. And this allows us to connect to our suffering without feeling enmeshed or capsized by it once we start to practice. And it increases the tenderness of our heart. So we start from a really nice place. We don't start with some of the more difficult aspects of life. We start with resting in the openness of mind. So what I'd like to do is for you to ring the bell, and then I'll just signal you at some point to end the practice. And we'll begin to settle into the openness of mind, and just know that that's just whatever that is for you is what it is tonight. So just, it's not going to be, probably not anything grand. You might just feel a little calmer. We're starting here to help us gather courage and stability. So go ahead. start by taking a few long, slow, deep breaths. Just feeling the breath rise from deep within the belly, moving up to the lungs, perhaps all the way into the throat. Noticing that little space at the top, and then releasing on the out breath. And just take a few long, slow, deep breaths in this way. And then for the next few minutes, as you breathe in, just hold your breath for maybe just a little bit longer at the top. And as you breathe out, just make your out breath a little bit longer than the in breath. And maybe pausing at the bottom. So if you need to, you can count with this. So maybe in breath 4 or 5. Maybe hold for 2, and out breath 7 or 8, just whatever your body seems to need. Just do this for a couple of minutes, and just this will help us to settle in. And then just allow yourself to settle into just a regular pace of breathing. Just giving ourselves a few minutes to just rest in the openness of mind and body. And if you get a little distracted by something, don't worry. Just go back to body, back to breath. Just reconnect. No judgment. dive in to working with texture. In this part of the practice, I'm going to imagine breathing in our difficulties, our pain, our suffering. Again, we are training our hearts to do what it does not want to do. Classical ways of doing this are to imagine breathing in something hot, dark, heavy, smoke, black goo. If you're a visual person, you might be able to visualize it. If you're a more sensate person, maybe you can sense a heaviness. Just take a few minutes with this and just find something you can work with. We're taking in this goo, this smoke, this heaviness. We breathe it into our hearts. And as we breathe it out, it is transformed. As we breathe out, we're releasing a feeling of cool, bright, lightness, freshness. Breathing in completely the darkness and the heaviness, however you feel or imagine that, through all the pores of your body. And breathe out, radiate out light, coolness through all the pores of your body. Just work with this, be curious, be exploratory with it, and just work with it until you feel it more or less synchronized with your in-breath and your out-breath. Allow yourself to breathe in the feeling, the image, the sensation of hot, dark, heavy, pinchy. Just allowing yourself to breathe in that discomfort, knowing that you're going to transform it on your out-breath to cool, bright light, perhaps a mist. Knowing that your own body can transform this difficulty and bring relief. next in-breath, you can begin, if you like, to work with a personal situation, any painful or difficult situation that feels real and alive for you. It can be someone you care about and wish to help. It can be your own personal difficulties. It can even be if you're finding this practice challenging. You can work with that if it's creating anxiety or fear. So holding whatever situation, whether it's your own or someone else's, just breathe in the sensation of the difficulty, whether it's hot and dark or just something that makes you feel anxious. We're working with anxiety, it's a good one for me for sure. Allowing myself to breathe in and feel that anxiety, and then breathing out relief, love, hope, whatever makes sense for the situation. So we're just turning the practice a little bit. And if you like, you can continue to work with the visualization. We want to keep something difficult right front and center in the heart. And then when you feel ready, you can begin to release the practice breath by breath. Just gradually returning again to rest in the openness of mind. I'm going to go back to that starting place for rest and recuperation. And so you can begin, when you feel ready, to again take a few long, slow, deep breaths, holding the breath a little bit at the top and a little bit at the bottom. Just bringing yourself back. Okay. I'd be interested in experiences, questions, anything? Take your time to think about something.
I'm wondering if you can speak to how perhaps the object of difficulty might change. Like, at first you might say, oh, that's the thing that's causing me pain. And then as we start to get comfortable with it and start to investigate it, we might see, oh, what I was seeing on the surface might not be true. Like, it's not my granddaughter.
Right. It's yeah.
It's
I mean,
something a bit more.
I have that experience.
Heart,
I have that experience too, and I think that's a really important insight.
Yeah.
I mean, we'll talk about this a little bit in different contexts, towards the end of this series of classes. But that's what this kind of investigation. I mean, we start to, and one teacher put it as, the shackles or the grip that we have on our heart, where we're so certain that it's this thing, we're so certain that it's that person is to blame, and then when we start to practice, it starts to loosen and kind of unlock, and then we're like, oh, it's actually not just that. So I think that's a really important part of the practice, and I think that's been a real gift for me. So similarly to realizing that it's not just about her making me mad or him making me mad. It's like, it's just mad. And breathing it in, I realize that we're kind of both in this together, and I loosen it for myself as well as for that other person. At the very least, I soften my own reactivity. At the very least, that's always a plus, right? I mean, I just think, just kind of as a side note, this last year in this pandemic, everybody's just, on pins and needles and just hyper reactive, like about everything, at least I feel that, like, just being out and, a lot more aggressive drivers and stuff like that,
Yeah, well, I was sort of in my, in just sitting now, it's like the focus was on bodily sensations, and at first it's like quite objectifying those bodily sensations as something I don't want. So how, like, the image of release is those will go away.
Right.
And then, and I feel like I can lock that in a place that it's wrong and needs to go away, but there's also, like, underneath that is, there's also a reaction. Maybe it's actually that reaction that's more unsettling than just a feeling.
Yeah. I mean, I think some of that is, honestly, I think some of that is how our minds work. This sort of cognitive front part of the brain wants to fix things and find solutions and wants it to go away, and we want to feel better. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, but it's usually more complex than that. And we're sort of wired in certain ways, it seems, to seek pleasure at the expense of others, and we have to sort of unlearn that, perhaps. I don't think it's our nature necessarily, but, well, I don't know, I kind of contradicted myself. But anyway, we're kind of in those two places. I mean, Shantideva puts it, I didn't get the quote exactly, but he basically says, seeking our own happiness is the cause of suffering. And seeking others' happiness is the source of joy. I mean, he puts it that sort of black and white, And then you kind of think, well, what's wrong with seeking my own happiness? I want to be happy too. But by making others happy, we make ourselves happy. So, yeah.
It seems to me that, like, natural selection teaches us that we're, like, special. And I don't know.
Oh, that's kind of...
Like, it teaches us that, like you said, like, seeking pleasure.
Uh-huh.
We're always constantly seeking pleasure.
Yeah.
It teaches it, and we can do that, and we do that at the expense of others.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, so you're talking about, like, nature. It's like, that's in our nature, it seems like. So,
yeah. It sure seems like it. Yeah, I mean, I don't know that much about, like, biology and evolution and all that kind of stuff, but, I think we're sort of capable of all kinds of things. And for whatever reason, some stuff gets rewarded or cultivated or something more often than other things. I've had discussions with people, I've said, this is probably off topic, but I've said that, that I think humans are predatory. We're a predatory species, and it's ugly. But we're not just that. And we're capable of many other good things, but, for whatever reason, and I've also had people tell me that sort of predatory nature of ours is what's allowed us to evolve as far as we have, which just doesn't sound so good. But, we're capable of a lot of things. But, we're super complex, and I think maybe that's kind of what you were pointing to with thinking that it's this concrete thing that's causing my suffering, but it's not that concrete thing. We're much more complex than that. We can open our hearts to a wide range of experience. So, yeah.
Anyu,
Yeah.
it strikes me that my sense of it feels good, or when you're using the word pleasurable, my sense of what feels good or feels peaceful is a very, very blunt kind of tool. It's like sugar tastes good, and and chocolate tastes good.
Yeah.
Like it's blunt in that way. the sort of immediate kind of relief is what I'm often seeking.
Sure,
I think that the practice maybe points to the peace or the feels good. There's a lot more to it than the sort of blunt animalistic kind of.
Right.
And it, it's sort of like, that person said that awful thing to me. It would feel great to punch them in the face. It's
Right.
that kind of
It's that kind of immediate gratification.
And I think as it was amazing this week how many times your teaching came up. It's like, oh yeah, I go straight to this kind of instinctual way to resolve the suffering that is directly in front of me, as opposed to this other way that is much more nuanced. It's a kind of I think Edjo often says the ease and the difficulty. It leans towards that, and I think like the more it comes up as an actual practice, like oh yeah, like we were saying before, those 4 preliminary ideas, right? It really lets you begin somewhere else.
That's a really good.
I'm going on quite a bit here.
No, that's totally fine. That's beautifully said. I like that. It lets you begin somewhere else, rather with this kind of self-protective, me, mine,
Yeah, and it may be like I keep thinking also about abuse and trauma and places where like I don't want to just like make someone else like the happiness doesn't just come from making that person feel happy, right? There's a complexity there, and like the more I feel like maybe the more one practices, it's like it would feel good. It would feel like provisionally a solution to punch that person in the face. Maybe it will, but then it's like I think the practice like sort of reveals there's a cost to that also, and it's much more nuanced than that kind of one-to-one. And it's like not. It's also like. It's not a pleasant thing to. Like it does. It's not meant to make you feel good.
Right.
I think the practice isn't meant to make you feel like justice has been served, or that now everything is like equalized again. It reveals something else about the nature of how we react to suffering. I'm sorry.
No, you don't have to. I'm just thinking. I'm really. That was, I think, very beautiful what you shared. But I'm thinking about just the practice of compassion itself. It most of the time doesn't feel that great.
Yeah.
It just doesn't feel that good to be compassionate. We want it to be like, everything's hearts and flowers and sunshine, but it's not that. And sometimes compassion is difficult, and it's difficult like when you have that urge to, if somebody says something really insulting, or we want justice to be served. And there's certainly plenty of cases, but what is that? What was it, day before yesterday? Was it day before yesterday was the anniversary of George Floyd's murder? And all of the ugliness and pain and complexity and that has unleashed, putting Derek Chauvin behind bars for the next, 100 years or whatever it is, that's not going to fix it. That's going to keep him out of circulation, which is probably a good thing. But you know what I mean? It's that when you start looking at that kind of stuff, and then do we have compassion for him as a human being? He's a human being. He's done something terrible, and he's acting out of God knows what. His own hatred and his own, difficulties, and what he was taught as a person and all that kind of stuff, and what he believed his power was as a police officer, and blah 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 blah. I don't know. That's the kind of stuff I start thinking about. Just like, what do we do with that? And the fact that people are still, we've had shootings, like one just the other day. They're becoming so routine. I don't pretend to know how to stop any of that. I'm just saying, it's just kind of this sort of feeling of justice and this feeling of wanting to make it right and put a stop to it is so I don't know how to do that. And I think, it maybe sounds, maybe it's that being a child of illusion thing, that if we can each keep practicing this, maybe just, bit by bit, we can at least start to help our own communities. So I don't know. Yeah.
If there's one thing that I've only started practicing for a few weeks, but if there's one thing that it's helped me come to terms with is that other people's suffering and other people's happiness is also my own. And so
That's a huge realization, I think. Yeah, no, if you realize that right now, you're good.
Well, I can realize
just after a few
but-
weeks,
yeah.
No, it is true though. It is really true. And then when we're feeling, you notice that when you're grumpy, like you assume that everybody kind of else is, or you want to drag them in. You want to drag them in with you. That's just natural. I'm grumpy. I'm going to make you grumpy too, so that we're all grumpy together. And so, on the other hand, there are some people that hate you all the time. Stop being so happy. I don't know. It's just very interesting. In its simplest form, I find doing it on the spot for those kind of flare-up interactions, it's super helpful for that as a tool. But it's more than that. But I'm just saying it at its simplest level, I find it really helpful for that. And like any spiritual practice, it unfolds over a lifetime. So it's, I'm not saying that any of this is a replacement for those of you who've been like me, who've been practicing Zen for years, or you're just starting out. There's so much out there to take. You find that specific things work in specific situations, and that can be really helpful. Any other comments, questions?
The beautiful piece of that experience for me was that I began focusing on a difficulty on my relationship with my mother, and we've been struggling, and then I very quickly found myself just breathing into any pain that she may have experienced in her life, and past, present, or future, and I just breathing in the pain and breathing out healing, just for any pain that she may have experienced, and how that her action, any action that she is taking is probably from some sort of pain that I don't understand or couldn't conceive, and so it just so quickly turned to that, and then I began breathing into pain for my mother, my mother-in-law's pain, and and to other people, and I just, it was amazing to me how quickly it went from me focusing on this struggle of a relationship that I've been having to just breathing healing into anyone, pain in multiple people in my life, and it was
Yeah, that's really beautiful too. And I'll point out that if you look up I forget which one it is, but Pema Chodron somewhere online has a specific practice with our mothers. I'm a mom. Lots of us in here are moms. It's a hard job. And my mother's deceased, but I had a really difficult relationship with her, and I still practice. A picture of her on my altar, and when I look up there again, I go, and then so, hi Mom. I just have to take a few minutes to, like you say, you don't even know what the pain is. You don't even know. My mother was born in 1927. I don't even know the world that she grew up in. I have no idea what that world was like. So that's the, we can just really breathe that in and just really, and it transforms the relationship. And relationships with mothers are among the hardest that we have. So anyway, yes, thank you for sharing that. That's beautiful. Yeah.
I'm just curious, like what you would say with Tonglen. Sorry, I'm making sure they can hear me.
That's okay. No worries.
Like, would you say it's about transformation, like almost an alchemical thing, or is it more about feeling both sides of holding both?
I think it might be both. I kind of like the whole alchemical thing, that we can actually, that our bodies actually have the capability of transforming that. We imagine it, and it's kind of like faking it a little bit. But I think that's a valid point, the alchemical aspect of it. And really, I would suggest really working with that, believing that that's what's happening. And it is, the other name for the practice is exchanging self and other. So yes, putting ourselves into another's place, imagining ourselves to be like you were saying with your mother, what would that be like, to just acknowledge. So I think both are true. I mean, I think it was, I didn't think of it specifically alchemically, but I like that. I don't know if the word analogy is the right thing, but I like that model, I guess, of, that we really are transforming that.
Sure, I think when I was doing Tonglen, it felt less like anything was moving or transforming, and more like, it's kind of like when you laugh and cry at the same time.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Or just kind of your heart breaks and it hurts, and you feel kind of love, but nothing is resolved. Maybe kind of what Jocko was pointing to.
And maybe nothing is resolved. I don't know. I just think about, maybe this is what you're saying. I'm not really sure, but when you're using your example, when someone insults you, and you just feel that clamp. You can feel that in your body. You feel that, somebody's insulted me, boom, and and it just builds up, and you want to release it this way, but then can you transform it? Okay, let me just breathe that in and see what I can breathe out, rather than having to, I don't know, spit it out or whatever the, right word is, but, we can transform it rather than just, throwing it out there for someone else to take. It's like a game of hot potato, So next week, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick a subset. There's 59 slogans in this whole practice, and there's no way I can go through all of them, not fairly anyway. And I'm going to pick a subset of them, and maybe we'll pick an emotion like anger or something, and see how, using those slogans. And I had this kind of idea, if people are into it. I've got some paper at work that's like cardstock, and I was like, I could just print up a bunch of them, and then you can just set them out, and I can put them online, and people can print them, and you can just, okay, this is my slogan for the day, I'm going to work on it. So just kind of playing with something like that for next week. And then that'll be it for our lojong practice, 3 weeks of lojong. Boy, it's going to go by fast, but I hope I've just, opened a little door for exploration. There's lots of information out there, and I highly recommend Norman Fisher's book, because he's a Zen practitioner, so that he kind of puts it in Zenish language. So,
What's the name of it?
I think it's called, Training in Compassion, Zen Teachings on Lojong, something like that. Yeah, pretty sure that's what it's called. But it's very readable. Yeah. All right. Buddha